Back in 2014, we did a tour with the High Marshals through Jordan, Israel and Turkey. And some of you I know have done a similar tour with the High Marshals. But one of the first places that we went to in Jordan, I think on the first day, it might have been when we hopped off the plane. We didn't even get a rest except on the plane. And we went to a place called Tall El Hammam, which was an ancient city in the Jordan Plains just above the Dead Sea. And that was supposed by the people that conducted a tour over that city for us, that was supposed to be the city of Sodom. So since then, I was fascinated and intrigued to find out a little more about that. And the excavations on Tall El Hammam initially started in 2012. So we were there only 2 years after they started the excavations. It's progressed a long way since then. And there's some amazing evidence that's come out of the archaeological digs that have occurred on that place in the last few years. So what I want to do is to, it's not going to advance. Just click on the screen. Good. So we're going to look at evidence from a few different points of view. Some biblical evidence that seems to be overlooked by people, some archaeological evidence, and something that's happening with the Dead Sea right at the moment. We won't go through Sodom and Gomorrah the reading from Genesis 14. We'll look at that in a little more detail later, and I'll just quickly go through this. It's the record of the 5 kings from Canaan who came against Kedorlaomer. That's the Mesopotamian kings, actually, that came against the Canaanite kings. And the record tells us where they moved around the Dead Sea. And at the end of that, they took possession of Sodom after they captured the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plains. And that happened in what they call the Vale of Siddim, which is full of slime pits, the record in Genesis tells us. They took Lot captive and took him right up as far as Damascus. Abram heard about this and took a band of men and brought Lot back down. And on his way back, that's when he was greeted by the king of Sodom and also by Melchizedek, the king of Salem. So we'll look at that in a little more detail later. The Dead Sea, as we know, is the lowest spot on Earth.
Is the moon working?
It's on.
Okay, Nick's just on.
Thanks.
For a long time, the surface level of the lake was thought about as being 400 metres below sea level. But in the beginning of the 1960s, Israel and Jordan started drawing more water out of the Jordan River, and the sea level started to drop. And by the mid-2010s, it had dropped 30 metres. Now, 30 metres is a long way. It was then about 430 metres below sea level, and it was dropping at the rate of 1 metre every year. Now, this goes back probably to about 2016. So that's what it looks like at the moment. You can see the shoreline was right back up here. It's receded down and withdrawn back quite a long way. And in some places, the shoreline's receded by over 2 kilometres. It's gone a long way back. So the Dead Sea on those little maps set up in the top left corner is shown as extending right down south through that gap. That was in 1911. By 1978, the bottom half of it had just about dried up. And by 2016, there was only virtually the top part of the Dead Sea left, and there were some salt basins in the lower area. So the surface area in 1930 was about 1,000 square kilometres, By 2016, it was only 605 square kilometres. So 2016 is a bit in the past now. It's gone down even further. It's probably only about half the size that it used to be. And it's a lot lower in its depth. So in this group of figures here, in 1950, it was approximately 390 metres below sea level. The beginning of the 21st century was 417. By 2015, they estimate that it'll be 550 metres below sea level. Thanks, Tom. And the reason for that, as we said, is because Jordan and Israel are drawing a lot of water out of the Jordan River, and it's just not reaching the Dead Sea. That little graph at the bottom, in 1930, the total water out of the Jordan River was 449,000 million gallons of water a year. By 2004, it's only about a quarter of that. So they're just using up the water at a greater rate than what is being evaporated off the Dead Sea. So just last week or the week before, the Times of Israel reported that the Dead Sea is now located at minus 436 metres below sea level, and it's dropping about 1.1 metres per year. So think of a telegraph pole. One of our standard sort of telegraph poles out is probably about 10 to 12 metres high. So if you stack three of those on top of each other, that's how much the level of the Dead Sea has fallen since about the 1970s. That's a lot of water. Can you imagine the lake dropping by that sort of level? There'd be nothing left of it because it's not really deep. The Dead Sea at least is fairly deep, so there's still some water there. But that's an enormous drop. I took that photo when we were travelling over in Jordan, and that's the canal, the man-made canal that connects the north end of the Dead Sea with the south end of the Dead Sea. It used to be covered in water. They've now got to have a canal to take the water down. And there's an aerial view of that same canal linking the two areas of the Dead Sea together. That sign in the distance there, that little yellow sign, says danger of drowning. And yet the sea is probably a couple of kilometres further off in the distance. It's a long way away. And now the signs have been replaced by others that say danger, sinkholes, do not enter. And there's signs on the roads, beware sinkholes area ahead. Most of us, when we went to Masada, went up to on a cable car that went right up to the top right-hand peak there. But one of our group decided to walk down that winding path down the side of the mountain, unnamed. That's a picture that I took from the top of Masada, looking down at that area which Ron White reckons is Gomorrah. Now, I cannot see a city in there at all. I can't see houses, I can't see city walls or any of that. It's just weathered landforms, and another nearby shot of the similar sort of landforms there. So where were Sodom and Gomorrah and those 5 cities of the plain? Well, this map shows them down the south end of the Dead Sea. This one's similar. That one shows them in a couple of different places, again, south end of the Dead Sea. This one actually names the Valley of Sodom and the plain, which is not only the south end of the Dead Sea, but extends even further south, according to that map. And this one, again, locates the Valley of Sodom and Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities south of the Dead Sea. But look at the record in Genesis 13. It says that Lot looked around and he saw the whole plain of the Jordan. And you remember where Lot was at this time? He was in Bethel Ai with Abram. And he looked out and he saw the plain of the Jordan. He saw that it was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and he set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So there's Bethel Ai to the left of that blue circle, with Jericho just inside the circle. And there's, we'll see in a moment, some people call that the Kikar of the Jordan. And that's where Tall El Hammam is, the just outside the blue circle in the sort of towards the bottom right there. So Lot looked out from Bethel Ai and he saw that well-watered plain of the Jordan. And he thought, that's where I want to go. And you should note that from Bethel Ai, it's not possible to see the southern end of the Dead Sea. You might see the top of the Dead Sea, the north top of it, but you cannot see the south end. So it was impossible for Lot from Ai to see the plain of the Jordan anywhere other than in that Kikar. And it tells us that Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and he set out from Abram at Bethel Ai towards the east. He went east. He didn't go south to the bottom of the Dead Sea. He went east across that plain towards Jordan. There's another view. Bethel Ai looking east, and there's the circle of that circular plain of the Jordan, which Lot chose to live in. And there's those other two areas right down the south end of the Dead Sea, which you wouldn't be able to see unless you went up in a very high aeroplane or even a satellite. So most of you know Dr. Lee Rittmeyer. He's an archaeological architect and also a Christadelphian. And he did a foreword to a book by Dr. Stephen Collins, who's done most of the archaeological work on Tall El Hammam. And he wrote this in the foreword to that. These verses make it quite clear that the cities of the plain, the cities of the Kikar, the vast circular expanse at the southern end of the Jordan River, must have been located east of Bethel Ai, that is, northeast of the Dead Sea. The eastern part of the Kikar can be clearly seen from this location, and he worked at a place called Kirbet El Makwata, not sure how you pronounce that, Makwati, which has been identified as Ai. And so Brother Lee Rittmeyer worked there, and that's the view that he saw from that place, looking across the plain of the Jordan towards the east and towards what's believed to be Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's a bigger view of it. Looking east, that's where he set out towards the east, and he pitched his tents near Sodom. So you can see the Dead Sea's off to the right, the Jordan Valley's up to the left, and in the middle is that circular plain. We also went, before we got there, was it before we got there? I'm not sure. We went to Madabar in Jordan. And there's a church in Madabar which has a mosaic on the floor, which is the oldest known map of the Holy Land. There's some of our group in the middle picture, and there's the floor in that church. It's still AD, 542 to 570 AD. But if we look at that mosaic, it shows the Dead Sea, and then to the left of that, the Jordan River. It shows Jerusalem, and it shows two unnamed cities up at the top left, exactly where Tall El Hammam is and Gomorrah, which is probably Sodom and Gomorrah. So those two cities show on that most ancient map. So going back to that Genesis record, which we didn't read because I'm going a bit long, and we'll just skip through it to say what it's about. We read about those three Mesopotamian, or the four Mesopotamian kings coming against Canaan, and they travelled down the east side of the Dead Sea, and in order they strike the Rephaims in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzims in Ham, the Emims in Shaveh Kiriathaim, the Horites in Mount Seir as far as El Paran, which is Elat. Then they turned and they started going north again, and they smote the Amalekites at En Mishpat, which is Kadesh. And then they smote the Amorites that dwelt in Hazez on Tamar. And then we read that the five kings of Canaan met the Mesopotamian kings in the vale of Siddim, the vale which was full of slime pits. and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into those slime pits, and others fled to the mountains. And then later in the chapter, as we said, the Mesopotamian kings defeated Lot and took the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and headed north and took them as far as Damascus. Abram then set out on a rescue mission, and he gathered all the stolen goods and brought Lot back again. And on his return, it tells us that he was greeted by the king of Sodom and Melchizedek, the king of Salem. So that, in a nutshell, is that reading of Genesis 14. So where is that valley of Siddim? We're told it was full of bitumen pits in some versions. It's probably better rendered as, excuse me, as slime pits. And as they fled, they fell into those pits. See if I can reach this water down here without spilling it. So where were they located? The map on the left shows the kings gathering from Mesopotamia, travelling down, and they reckon on that map that around about that number 2 there on the screen was where the battle took place. And then it heads north, and Abram joins in from number 5 there and goes up and rescues Lot. If we follow on the other map where they came from, Damascus, they went to Canaan Ashtaroth first, then they went to Ham, then they went to Kiriathaim, then they went down to El Paran, which is right down at the tip of the Red Sea. Then they turned north and they went to Kadesh Barnea, and then we're told they went to Hazazon Tamar. But in another record in 2 Chronicles, we're told that some came who told Jehoshaphat, saying, "A great multitude is coming against you from beyond the sea, from Syria. Behold, they are in Hazazon Tamar," that is, En-Gedi. So they actually went from Kadesh Barnea up to En-Gedi on the western side of the Dead Sea. Another map shows a similar thing down there, but they still place Sodom and Gomorrah down the bottom here, and somehow work out that the kings of Sodom did battle or went down the south end of the Dead Sea there. And that map on the left actually leaves out Kadesh and the Amorites at Hazazon Tamar. Some aerial views or satellite views, I guess, of the Dead Sea. In 1972, there were no sinkholes around the Dead Sea, and the sea level was 396.5 metres below sea level. By 1990, there were 70 sinkholes, and you can see them starting to form where that yellow is on the side of the Dead Sea at the map. By 2000, that area had extended, and the south end of the Dead Sea started drying up and was only left with the salt basins that they mined the salt from. By 2013, there were over 4,000 sinkholes, and you can see it stretches for quite a distance along that western shore of the sea above En-Gedi. But by 2016, it extends down to En-Gedi and encompasses much of that shore of the Dead Sea. Now, Lynn Rittmeyer says, Dr. Stephen Collins quotes him actually as saying to him that, and I'm reading the red lettering, during Tol el-Hammam's final 200 years of the Middle Bronze Age, that is the time of Abram, Dead Sea levels were hitting historic lows about where they are today. So what we're seeing today is what the sea was like back in the time of Abram. And Lean points out correctly that the Valley of Siddim, where the battle took place, was the widened beach area at the northeast corner of the Dead Sea, resulting from extremely low lake levels. So if we look at another aerial view of the Dead Sea. There's En-Gedi on the western shore. We read that the Mesopotamian kings came up and defeated the Amorites at En-Gedi. Then they would have continued travelling north. And the very next verse says, then the kings of Sodom, the kings of Gomorrah, the kings of Admah, the king of Zeboim, the king of Bela and Izala went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Sodom. So it doesn't happen earlier on in that record of all the battles. It happens almost towards the end. When the kings had reached En-Gedi, they continued north, and that's when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the others came against them. And they would have met together in that area where all the sinkholes were, where the slime pits were and where they are now. So we see views like that on that western shore of the Dead Sea. They look very much like slime pits, don't they? Those sinkholes that are in that photograph. That's the area where those battles took place. That archaeologist that we saw a while back spoke about looking for the biggest cities in the plain. And at the time of the Bronze Age, the Tall El Hammam was 10 times larger than Jerusalem and 5 times larger than Jericho. It was a large city, and that's what the archaeologists were looking for. And they discovered that in Tall El Hammam in Jordan. There's Dr. Lean Rittmeyer with the chief archaeologist, Dr. Stephen Collins, on the site there, and a view of Tel El Hammam, which quite possibly is Sodom, and nearby the Tor Kafrin, which is quite possibly Gomorrah. Lean Rittmeyer did some excavation work there, and he discovered the gates of the city. Very significant gates. It was a very significant city, and we read of Lot sitting in the gates of the city. There it was, down where that red arrow is, that's where they excavated the gate of that city. There's a lot more excavation being carried out there than when we saw in 2014. So Genesis 19 tells us about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it tells us that the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulphur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground, which explains why the place was uninhabited for over 600 odd years. It was totally destroyed and wiped out. They couldn't carry out any horticultural activity there at all. And Abram went out early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace, which is again in itself further evidence that he looked out towards the east from where he was and saw the smoke of the land. And so God destroyed those cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and the others in the plain. And it says, the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulphur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. So what I'm going to look at from here on is some evidence of what actually happened at this place, at Tor El Hammam. What happened to destroy that city and the others around about it? Well, scientists believe that it was a meteor explosion above the land. And they've discovered lots of things in the pottery and the other stuff that's there to lead them to that sort of conclusion. They describe the destruction as deadly winds whipped through the city, demolishing every building. They sheared off the top 40 feet, that's 12 metres, of the 4-storey high palace, and blew the jumbled debris into the next valley. Can you imagine that? A 12-metre high building, 40 foot high, with walls 4 metres thick, and it just totally blew it off its foundations into the valley next to it. A tremendous explosion. And they didn't find any people, or they only found evidence of people and animals within the city. Their bodies were torn apart and their bones were blasted into small fragments. It was totally destroyed. It talks there about extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation in nearby humans. They were ripped apart by the explosion that happened there. They found in the city there a pottery shard which was melted on just one side, melted into glass. And that can only happen with very extreme heat. They found zircon crystals inside a bubble in the glass, which could have only been formed by temperatures of above 4,000 degrees Celsius. And the layer of glass on that pot was only 1 millimetre thick. Not the entire depth of the shard and not on the other side of the pot. It was a very intense heat, not a long exposure to a heat like burning petrochemical eruptions or anything else like that. It was an extreme heat that melted one side of the pot for just a few seconds. And they concluded that that shard was exposed to temperatures between 8,000 degrees Celsius and 12,000 degrees Celsius for less than a few milliseconds. And that certainly supports the idea of an airburst. Not a meteor hitting the ground, but exploding above the ground. Now that happened back in 1908. There was a massive blast in Russia where a meteor exploded above the ground. It left no crater on the ground, but it flattened 2,000 square kilometres of area, just flattened everything that was there. It was a burst that happened above the ground. And someone's done this other map with it superimposed on the northern end of the Dead Sea. You can see the site of Tel El Hammam there. And the evidence shows from their excavations there that the heat from that blast travelled from the southwest up to the northeast. So it's from here up to there. And that's evidenced by the sides, one side of the pot being melted and the other not. That blast in Russia was 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. 1,000 times more powerful. It was a huge blast. Even on some of the pottery, they found diamond-like particles, soot and carbon that had been blasted against the side of the pot with extreme temperature and pressure, so much so that the carbon was turned into diamonds from the pressure of that blast. So something really dramatic happened in that area, and it fits in with what the Bible says about what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. That high salinity in the soil could also explain why the area wasn't occupied for that 500 or 600 years after that eruption of that blast. If the blast occurred near the northern end of the Dead Sea, it would have thrown salt water up everywhere as well, and that could account for the land not being usable after it. Just a couple of quotes to finish off the night. In Luke it says, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulphur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. That's something to look forward to, isn't it? And in Peter, by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. And so we're going to see the same sort of thing happen again. So I think we've seen ample evidence both from archaeology, from what's happened to the land around the Dead Sea, the sinkholes there, the description of that battle with the kings. I think we've seen ample evidence to show that Sodom and Gomorrah really did exist. And they probably are in that location where they've said at Tel El Hammam in the plain of the Jordan, now in current country of Jordan. So I think that's a tremendous boost to our faith in the truth of the Bible, that what the Bible has said has been correct, and it's been proved scientifically to be correct. I think that's a tremendous boost to our faith. Just to finish off, here's a few pictures of when we visited our group of Gary and Helen's, I think they call it the High Marsh Highlights Tour, when we went up on top of Tel El Hammam. That's it. Thank you.